From the corridors of diplomacy to the world of prose and poetry, our guest today is a man of many talents and passions. Ambassador Abhay Kumar is a diplomat currently serving as Deputy Director General of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations. A native of Bihar, Ambassador Kumar is a 2003 batch IFS officer. He holds the distinction of being India's youngest ambassador at the age of 38 when he was appointed India's ambassador to Madagascar back in 2018. Beyond diplomacy, he is an acclaimed poet, author, editor and translator with more than a dozen poetry collections to his name. His poems have appeared in over 100 literary journals and have been translated into several languages. His celebrated Earth Anthem has found resonance across the globe, translated into over 160 languages. His latest book, Nalanda, How It Changed the World, brings to life the rise, decline and the resurgence of one of India's greatest ancient civilizations. Today, we delve into his journey, his literary contributions with a special focus on Nalanda, which has a reflection of learnings of the past and which can help us, guide us in building a future rooted in knowledge. And what better place to have a conversation than right here at the Parliament Library, one of the richest repositories of books and knowledge in the country today. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. Welcome to Sansad TV. What an absolute pleasure to have you for this conversation, particularly about your latest book, which is a national bestseller. So let me begin the program by congratulating you for this extensive research document that you've given to the entire country and the world to read about one of India's greatest ancient civilizations. The first question, and this is one common question that I ask every author, perhaps to understand the context and the circumstances in which their book comes into being. So to begin with, share with us and our viewers what inspired you to come up with Nalanda.
Well, thank you first of all so much for having me on Sansad TV, and I'm delighted to talk about Nalanda. So in short, the answer is I am from Nalanda, and I wanted to tell this great history of Nalanda, share how did it become such a celebrated university, what led to the rise of Nalanda, and what happened to it, who taught there, who were the great masters of Nalanda, who made it possible to make Nalanda such a world famous university, and who were the students who were studying there, what contributions did it make in shaping our modern world, and what happened to it, how did it decline, what led to its fall, and also the global footprints of Nalanda today, what remains have been left from this great university. So I wanted to tell all this in an articulate and passionate way, doing scholarly work, but also through the eye of a poet, through the so telling not only the dry history of Nalanda, but a much more vivid account of life, everyday life at Nalanda. So that's how this book began, and it's here today.
You've written in the introduction part of the book that as a child, when you visited the ruins, it was a different kind of experience. Now that you went there for the purpose of writing this book, share with us about how the experience was in terms of understanding the place, and was there anything that you discovered that took you by surprise?
Mm-hmm. Well, so when I remember going to visit the ruins of ancient Nalanda as a child, and what we were told that the largest surviving structure there, we were told that's the library, which was burnt and it kept burning for 6 months. That was the legend. But later on, I realized that the building is actually a stupa of Shariputra, the great son of Nalanda, and not the library. So that was the first thing which was which came to, which was a completely different than we were told as a child. And so also I learned a lot while doing the research, and I had completely new way of looking at Nalanda. So it's actually that stupa, Shariputra's stupa was actually the nucleus around which the whole Mahavihara developed, and that stupa was founded way back in 3rd century BC by Samrat Ashok. So and these are some of the facts. There is a hazy period in the evolution of Nalanda which nobody tells you. So everybody tells you that 5th century AD the first vihara was founded by the Gupta emperor Sakraditya or Kumargupta I, and then it functioned as a great university or a Mahavihara till end of 12th century. When it was destroyed. So, but that is not exactly the whole story. The whole story goes much further earlier, and Buddha himself spent a lot of time at Nalanda. He gave many of his sermons there, and Shariputra, his first chief male disciple, about whom nobody knows in Nalanda. So it's actually Shariputra is the key figure for Nalanda. So it was very startling for me to find that the person who is responsible for actually Nalanda has been completely forgotten. So Shariputra, Buddha's first chief disciple, is the person along with his friend called Mogglayana, who is also from Nalanda, and it's actually these two people who take Buddhism to greater heights. And Samrat Ashok, when he comes to Rajgir from Patliputra, comes to Nalanda, he builds a stupa for Shariputra, around which the whole university develops. And you have 300 years later a great philosopher from South India coming there, Nagarjuna, and who brings this philosophy of Madhyamaka or Shunyata. And it's Nagarjuna who lays down the philosophical foundations of Nalanda in the 1st century AD. So Nalanda's history goes much deeper and much further earlier than 5th century AD. But problem with with historiography is that it requires concrete evidence. So archaeologically, a stupa has been found, a modern structure at the core of Shariputra's stupa, which turned into a chaitya or a temple over 7 successive phases of building, and that's the largest structure, which everybody tells you is the library.
In fact, when I visited the place 2-3 years ago, the guide told us that that's the library, and perhaps that's every visitor knows that as a library. We are so glad you put out what the real story is. But as a son of the soil, you said you're from Nalanda. How did it influence you or assist you, I should say, in conducting your research? Because a lot of stories about how the university came into being is not there in public domain, perhaps maybe in the internet, but it's not readily available for people to know about, which you have now compiled in this book. So how did that advantage help you in writing this book and conducting this extensive research?
It's not there actually. So I could only find it through deep research, because this story is nowhere. I mean, the linking it with Shariputra is not there. I mean, nobody tells you that when you visit Nalanda. All these guides, they tell you something else. So I had to really build this whole history from from Buddha's time, and that's why I start the first chapter in this book. You can see it talks about Rajgriha and Nalanda being a suburb or a suburban city of Rajgriha, and Rajgriha is the capital of Magad. So I start the story from there, because everything begins in Rajgriha. It's in Rajgriha that Shariputra and Mogglayana, they meet Buddha, and it's in Rajgriha that Buddha lays down the second turning of the wheel at Gridkut Parvat. And it's in Rajgriha, Nagarjuna tells us that Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara gives this philosophy of Sunyata to Shariputra. So Rajgriha becomes the center, while Nalanda is the suburb. So that story is not very well known, and that's how I trace this history, which is a fascinating history of how Nalanda and Rajgriha were an intellectual complex, very closely tied to each other.
You also speak about some of the prominent figures who perhaps studied there and travelled globally to spread the message of what was being taught there at this ancient center of learning. Was there any character that you would want to talk about, perhaps, that you were more fascinated with, and who played a major role during that time?
So see, what has happened that when we talk about Nalanda, we only talk about two foreign scholars, Chinese scholars who visited Nalanda, Xuanzang and Itzing, and the story ends there. And I grew up in Nalanda, and I had no idea from any sources that who were the Nalanda teachers, why Nalanda had such a great influence, yes. Why did it become such a famous university? So there must be great teachers there. So I started finding them, that who were these people, so Nagarjuna himself is the founder figure. He is basically the founder of the philosophical tradition at Nalanda with Shunyata, and he's a great figure. So Nagarjuna is also responsible for writing Pragya Paramita Sutras, which he antedates 600 years earlier and tells that these sutras were given by Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara to Shariputra. But it's actually Nagarjuna who is the writer of those sutras. These sutras are Pragya Paramita Sutras are the foundation text of Mahayana Buddhism. He's a fascinating figure. But how I came across another great figure, not through any Indian, or any scholar from India, but a poet diplomat, Octavio Paz, Mexico's ambassador to India, and his book In Light of India, and there he mentions of Dharmakirti, and he tells he discusses a poem of Dharmakirti in his book. So I was very fascinated with how come Dharmakirti features in his book, and Dharmakirti is actually he's a Pandit of Nalanda, he's a head of Nalanda, and so he talks about in 6th and 7th century Dharmakirti is the major figure, and he is not only a philosopher but also a poet, and he writes a poem called Proof, which is proof about that nothing in this world has been created through a poem. And so this is how, and he is a poet, so I felt very close to Dharmakirti, and I started reading more about his life and his works. So not only him, when Xuanzang visits Nalanda, that time Sila Aditya is the head of the university, and there are detailed description of the contribution of Sila Aditya.
So on a lighter note, if I could ask you, if you could time travel to Nalanda today, and back to the time when Nalanda was at its prime, who would be that one person that you would be most eager to meet?
Well, Aryabhatt, because Aryabhatt, not only gave us zero. I mean, he is the first mathematician to use zero as a digit, and but not only zero, but he also gives us algebra and algorithm and the value of pi, and so on. He also tells us that Earth is moving. So he is the most. He is the one who has made fundamental contribution in shaping our modern world, shaping in fact European Renaissance, which happened thanks to introduction of zero to Europe and Indian numbers. So I would like to meet Aryabhatt because of his scientific temper, and also because he is he looks at the sky all the time, and he is calculating the distance between the sun and earth. He is looking at the star constellations. I have written a book about star constellation called Celestial. In fact, I have written anthems on each of the planets in the solar system. So he would be the most interesting person to meet, not in the dormitories, or cells in Nalanda, but rather in the towers. Nalanda, as you see, had these great towers which rose above the clouds, and so I would like to meet him in one of those towers and discuss, look at the sky together.
The manner in which you've written it already appears to the reader as if you get to know each of these persons that you've mentioned personally and about their contributions. So Aryabhatt is somebody who we know, who has been a prominent figure in Indian history, Indian mathematics, globally as well. He is a known figure. But you've also listed out several names. Were there any names that you can recall who've made significant contributions but remain lesser known, little known in history?
I think all of these, let us talk about, for example, Santa Rakshita or Padam Sambhava. So Santa Rakshita and Padam Sambhava are responsible for taking Buddhism to Tibet, and they are the one who take the teachings of actually Vajrayana in 8th to 9th century to Tibet and laid the foundations of Buddhism in Tibet. So, and Tibet, you can see today, is a living example of Nalanda tradition and how Nalanda tradition is still alive. I would like to talk about also of a famous figure called Vajrabodhi, and he is a prince of the Pallava dynasty, but he comes to study at Nalanda, and then he goes to China actually, and he acts as an envoy, as an ambassador of Pallava court to Narasimhavarman III, to the Tang emperor in China. And he is also he introduces Vajrayana or Tantric Buddhism to China. So so these are some of the figures which I would like to mention, who have played a Atisha, for example, or the last monk of Nalanda, Dhyanbhadra. Very few people know about him, but Dhyanbhadra was ordained at Nalanda in the early 14th century.
Just curious to know that despite so much being written about Nalanda, discussed about Nalanda, now when we see the re-rise of Nalanda, what kind of efforts do you think should be made? Of course, you've made it at a personal level, but to bring back that lost legacy of Nalanda, so what is to be done today?
So first of all, that Nalanda had Nalanda had a interdisciplinary and holistic method of studying. So both science and philosophy and arts and technology, everything which was known to mankind was taught there. Medicine, ophthalmology, so everything was taught at Nalanda. So that's what university means. That's how the idea of university evolves. That it's the universal coverage of universal knowledge. And the teachers, and the students, they came from all across India, all across the known world. They were not all from Magad or from Nalanda. So you see most of these great masters of Nalanda are not actually they are not locals. They come from all across. So that's the first thing we must do to follow the Nalanda example, that we should make it truly universal. Particularly Nalanda, which has been restarted, should also have not only should have humanities, but should also have science, because science was at the foundation of Nalanda. Aryabhatt was able to invent, you can say, or discover zero, there, because the Buddhist philosophy of Sunyata was, informing the mathematics of Sunya. So there was, interdisciplinary learning. So that's very important. That first thing, that we must have interdisciplinary learning. We should have all subject. Second, we must have our institutions, open. So Nalanda was the first example in the education sector of internationalization or globalization of education. Students came all across the world. Teachers came from all across the world. So all our universities, must have doors open for international students. They do have, but they must do more to attract international students, so that the students, so they compete, and they maintain standards. The third thing, that education as a public good. Nalanda, once the students entered Nalanda, which was very difficult to get into, the Dwarapala Pandit asked many questions, and if you were able to answer, you would get into. But the success rate was only 2 to 3%. And once the students were inside the university, Mahavihara, they did not have to bother about hostels. There were plenty of living rooms for them. There was the greatest library on the planet in the first millennium. CE. It was in Nalanda. It's a great sutra library. So many of the monks who came from China, Korea, and Central Asia and Southeast Asia, they came to copy the sutras of Nalanda. Xuanzang himself copied 600 and took back 657 texts, while Itzing copied more than 400 Sanskrit texts and he took back. So Nalanda had a great library. So modern public institutions must focus on creating these digital dharmaganja, the name of the library at Nalanda, so that students could access the best of the resources available in the world today. So not only that, apart from scholarships, they should be provided for, so that education does not become a commercial project. Third thing was that students entered Nalanda to seek truth and seek the reality of nature. Reality of their goal was to get enlightenment, or to know. I mean, what does enlightenment mean? Buddha, what does Buddha means? It means bodh, it's knowledge actually. So Buddha is directly related to knowledge, and that's why you have Nalanda as a Buddhist institution. The history of colleges and university that begins with Buddhist viharas, because Buddhist viharas started teaching this Abhidharma, and became institutionalized, in the sense that you have the campus plan which was developed at Nalanda, the rectangular architectural plan, or it's called courtyard plan. The same courtyard plan has traveled from Nalanda to Oxford and Cambridge, and today you can see that how Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard owe it to Nalanda for what they are.
In fact, that would have been my next question about the architectural landscape that you've spoken about in the book as well. While reading and while you were talking at the moment also, I was visualizing in my mind how the courtyard looked like, or how the library looked like. So, you've traveled to several countries. In addition to Cambridge and Oxford, do you see the imprint of Nalanda elsewhere?
Everywhere. In fact, all the universities, the idea of university itself travels from Nalanda. So Nalanda's architectural plan, the courtyard architectural plan, is actually the blueprint for the architectural plan for the rest of the universities. So from I think this journey is very well documented by many scholars, including William Dalrymple in his Golden Road, and how Christopher Bakewith in his book Warriors of the Cloisters, how the idea of this travels from travels across the world. So this courtyard plan is very simple. You have a courtyard in the center, and you have the rooms for the dormitories for the monks around this courtyard. So courtyard is used to gather and to study, in the sense all the lectures happen there, and the students then go back to their rooms at night. So that courtyard plan is found everywhere. It's found in the University of Sorbonne, Collège des 18, which was started first college in France. Then it travels to Oxford and Cambridge, and even back home in India, if you see the Delhi University, it still has a courtyard plan. Other day I was in Miranda House, and I was seeing how there's a courtyard plan there as well. So if you will notice, even Harvard University, they have this courtyard plan. So the quads and courts at Oxford and Cambridge, are the prominent examples, but most of these universities follow that plan.
There's so much that perhaps mankind owes to Nalanda, as you rightly pointed out. But the irony is that the world doesn't know about Nalanda as much as it should. Even more tragic that the one who decimated the university, India's ancient center of learning, is a more prominent figure in our history than the ones who shaped the civilization. So tell us about how that has happened and how we need to also now course correct.
So see, I mean, the tragedy is not the decimation of Nalanda. Tragedy is that we have forgotten the great masters of Nalanda and are remembering, someone who is considered to be responsible for destroying it.
In a way, that was the history that was presented to us.
Exactly. So
how can we
so Nalanda has a more complex history, So Nalanda. So who was Bakhtiyar Khalji? He was one of the generals of Muhammad of Ghor, along with Qutbuddin Aibak and all. And India was, 10th century India. If you look 10th century onwards, 10th to 12th century, India is fragmented, politically, economically, militarily, and it's becoming weak. You see the great Mauryas during which the Nalanda's foundation was led, and the great Guptas who built the first concrete monasteries and Mahavihara. So they were all very very powerful empires or powerful dynasties, and which was followed by the great King Harsvardhana and Palas. The Palas ruled that part of India, for almost 300 years, and provided sufficient funds for running and maintenance of Nalanda. But what happened by the end of 11th century, that the funding started declining, the patronage, the royal patronage started declining, and India became politically divided. And that's a great lesson to learn even today, that what was the situation of India in 12th century. So that time, there was lots of infights. The Chauhans were fighting with Gahadwals, Gahadwals were fighting with the Senas, and Senas were fighting with the Palas. So in the south, Rashtrakutas were fighting. So it made north of India particularly politically weak and militarily weak. And you have the battle of Tarai, the second battle of Tarai, in which Prithviraj loses, and you have these generals of Muhammad of Ghor marching with. So Bakhtiyar Khalji marches to a place called Odantpuri, which is today known as Bihar Sharif, and only with 200 horses, unopposed. He goes to that monastery and destroys it completely, burns the books there, and slays the monks there, Buddhist monks living there. But now there is no historical evidence of Bakhtiyar Khalji going to Nalanda. It's nowhere. But Nalanda is only 10 to 15 kilometers away from Bihar Sharif or Odantpuri. So the circumstantial evidence, which if you examine any case in the court, there is a circumstantial evidence. So circumstantial evidence clearly points to the destruction of Nalanda by Bakhtiyar Khalji. But since there is no direct evidence, neither written, nor that not proven that he's gone there. So further substance is required, further research is required on that. But there is also evidence of eyewitness account of Dharmaswami, a Tibetan monk. But 40 years later, in 1235, he goes to Nalanda as a monk, and Nalanda is still functional there, but only limping. It's not functional in the sense it's limping. There is an very old 75 years old teacher called Rahul Sri Bhadra, who is teaching around 70 monks there, and Nalanda is sort of limping.
The scale and scope has reduced.
And it's facing continuous raids from the Turks who are based in Bihar Sharif now. Odantpuri, in the same at the same place which was raided by Bakhtiyar Khalji. So that also corroborates, supports the fact that Nalanda might have been damaged. But Nalanda was not completely destroyed. It was still functioning by 1235, and actually it kept functioning till early 14th century, as you have the monk Dhyan Bhadra from Bihar, from Magad, who gets ordained there, and then he travels to Korea.
what is that one biggest thing that you expect the readers to take away once they've read this book? And what is the kind of biggest impact that you think this piece of research will have on contemporary society, more so on the future generations?
So Nalanda stands for quest of knowledge. It's a metaphor actually. So if you, I would say that readers, they would realize that the idea of Nalanda never dies, because Nalanda is just not a building. It's the human quest for knowledge, and that's something I think we are still very much engaged into, acquiring knowledge, building knowledge, building a knowledge society. So 21st century society is going to be a knowledge society, and in a way I can say a Nalanda society. So that's the message I would like to like them to carry, because if they read the book, they will find that Nalanda never died. When Nalanda was declined in India in the 14th century, it physically disappeared. Phenpo Nalendra was established in Tibet, and today there are institutions named after Nalanda in New York, associated with Columbia University. There are institutions in Australia, in Malaysia, in Thailand, and so on. So India itself, has Nab Nalanda Mahavihara, has Nalanda Open University, and Nalanda is everywhere. At BITS Pilani, for example, their e-resource system is named after Nalanda. That shows that we all have a Nalanda in our hearts, and we carry it.
Although the time is running out, I'll take one personal question, and I've been very curious to ask you this question ever since I met you. You're a career diplomat with so much love for poetry, and you've written this wonderful book on Nalanda. You operate in a world of policy as a diplomat, but when you are a poet, you operate in a world of metaphor and emotion. So how do you reconcile the best of both worlds, and how does it reflect in your personality?
Well, so poetry and diplomacy for me, they complement each other. So, and I have in fact written about also, the similarities between poetry and diplomacy. So, both as poets and diplomats, you deal with words actually. And even in as Emily Dickinson tells you or tells us, tell it but tell it slant. I think that's both the art of diplomacy and art of poetry. The brevity of expression, that's also something, an attribute which is shared both by poetry and diplomacy. Sensitivity, for example, so all these, at least what poetry teaches you, at least one thing is to choose your words very carefully, and so does diplomacy. So for me, I mean, wherever I have been, I've served so far, I have felt that being a poet helps me to become a better diplomat.
Okay, so have you ever used poetry or literature as a tool for negotiations, or perhaps to build a rapport in the diplomatic circle?
So wherever I go, for example, when I was in Kathmandu, I used to run a program called Poemandu. And Poemandu brought lots of influential, and well-known people together who would otherwise not come. And poetry, when they know that you are a poet, it lowers the barriers of communication. So people want to connect with you, more deeply. In Brasilia, I used to run Chá com Letras, which brought lots of diplomats to the Indian embassy there, and not only diplomats but authors and poets and so on, intellectuals, literateurs, artists. And in Madagascar, I used to run this Lalitana. So of course I have done that, and I also feel that being a diplomat makes me a better poet, because I get to travel, I get to see the world from a different perspective. I spent 2-3 years in a country which is not 2-3 days as a tourist would spend. So it gives me enough time to understand the society, to absorb, to engage, and to write.
Okay, so with that, we'll have to wrap up the conversation, Ambassador. It's been lovely speaking to you about different aspects of the book, Nalanda, how it changed the world, and how it has the ability now to guide us towards building a future which is based on knowledge, on peace, something that India stands for, and also knowing about your personal experience, both as a diplomat and as a poet, something that has shaped your personality today as well. Wonderful to have you with us on Sansad TV.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be on Sansad TV.
So with that, viewers, it's a wrap on this telecast. Thank you very much for your time as well.